Hello, my name is Jacob and I'd like to introduce you to the first recording of the Historical Miniature Gamers podcast. We're a podcast with a heavy focus on Bolt Action, which is a skirmish miniature war game from Warlord Games. As well, we do focus a lot on tabletop gaming within Perth, Western Australia. Just a quick apology, there is a gap in the video version of this cast due to technical difficulties. Not to worry, we'll carry on and improve as we go. Enjoy your stay listening with us.
So I'm Daniel. I've been a wargamer for the better part of about 17 years now. And these guys just before saw my garage of shame, which was quite significant. So it's been quite good. And on my left?
So my name's Gorcin. I've been a wargamer for a little bit less than Daniel, probably a little over a decade now, but I've only sort of seriously gotten into it in the last couple of years. Done a lot of sort of, 40k, played a lot of that casually, but about a little over a year ago now, or maybe just under a year ago now, I heard about Bolt Action, got into it, and I thought, it's really sort of picked up a lot of steam for me and really sort of found that inspiration that a lot of people look for in hobby.
And I'm Jacob, and I'm probably the most fresh to wargaming than anybody in our sort of community that we have. Maybe I've been doing it about 5 years, pretty much since I've moved from Sydney to Perth, just as an escape from doing video games, which is kind of where my interests have been. But yeah, Bolt Action's my primary game. Really enjoy the conflict. The rules are super simple, and that's what I've enjoyed playing up until now for probably about 2-3 years.
And I didn't specifically state what game systems I play because there's a lot. Predominantly here I'll be talking about Bolt Action, and really that's coming from a connection with the particular period and the conflict. My family is a military family. They're all Navy on my mum and dad's side, back about, I think it's 5 generations back. So there's a few things in there which are quite relevant in how we play, and some of the expansions like Cruel Seas and the naval conflicts that happen in that space. But I've always had an interest in military history ever since I was very, very young. I was always getting military books out of the library. I was always getting military books and stuff from family and friends. And that really hasn't slowed down since I started with scale modelling and World War II models and planes and choppers and a whole box and dice. And then when I found Bolt Action, which is then simply scale warfare using that sort of time period and those sorts of vehicles and everything, I was already hooked on wargaming playing 40k, but I've had a very, very drastic shift into Bolt Action since picking that up in version 2. I did play in version 1, but version 2 is really where we started pushing things a bit more. I had a lot of local events start up as well. So what about yourself?
Yeah, so my interest in wargaming is not as personal as yours, Daniel, but I think sort of when you talked about how you got into military history and came from there, that sort of echoes a lot of my history as well. I was always interested in military history more than anything else, and I sort of tended to lean more towards the technical, tactical sort of level as opposed to operational and logistics. That I know some people love to argue dates and orders of battle and who was where and when and whether or not that particular variant was there at that time, but I found that really sort of didn't interest me as much. I was really interested in sort of strategy and tactics and sort of principles behind it. And naturally because of that, you end up in this dichotomy where sometimes, a new design from an ordnance department dictates doctrine, and sometimes you get that going the other way as well. And that's sort of where my interest has bled in. And I thought, is there some way where I can go from reading about a principle and applying it? And I was like, well, I can't really do that in the schoolyard because it's not going to fly very well. I'm getting my classmates to line up in shield walls, but scale modeling sort of works really well in that regard.
So just for people who are listening who aren't familiar with Bolt Action and some of the terms we're talking about, we're all talking about tabletop wargaming, which is really an advanced type of board games. Think of a real-time strategy that you're doing on a PC, like a video game. Think of an advanced version of chess. It's something that you play usually with one friend, and you're taking turns, and you have a side. Someone will be the allies, someone will be the Axis, and you pick a theater in a battle that you kind of want to simulate with your forces and see who's sort of the victor. And we're all from Perth in Australia, in WA, and we've probably all known each other in some way, shape or form for a couple of years now. And most of us do frequent a lot of establishments that focus on bolt action. So there's a few clubs in Perth that predominantly focus on bolt action. So you've got Outpost 6030, which has been probably in operation for at least 5 or more years.
10 or 15.
10 or 15.
Yeah,
Well,
long time.
I'm brand new to this.
Yeah. Since you've been here.
Yeah. Then you've got Perth Miniature Gamers Group.
Yep.
They've been around for a long time as well. They've kind of migrated to Chain of Command, which is a very similar rule set to bolt action in the sense that it's World War II, using the same scale models. It has some different advanced rules and these kind of things. And you've also got the Rockingham Historical Gamers, which we're all a part of.
Yep.
We have been operating for roughly 14 months. We have 150 members on Facebook now. And pretty much every Sunday someone is coming to visit us to either learn how to play bolt action, play an event, play a regular game, or these kind of things. And from there we'll explore other games predominantly around that conflict, because that seems to have a genuine link or interest between most of the people that we meet. But we also try all kinds of things. So, Dark Ages combat with like the Vikings and those kind of things, and 40k, which is Warhammer, which is Space Marines and Orcs and all those kind of things. But we predominantly play advanced board games with miniatures that you paint and you build the terrain and these kind of things. But some of these games are as simple as just cards or chits on our board game and these kind of things as well. But those are basically all of our interests. And
there's actually still New Year 2020. I started with a newborn child, 2 under 2, sucker for punishment, and that's obviously changed some of what I was trying to get achieved in 2020. But we do still have other events that are coming along. So, for example, on February the 22nd, which is a Sunday, Objective-Secured is running a mixed gaming day with a whole bunch of systems being played. One of those is bolt action. We're doing an event called Raiding Party, which focuses on the firefight supplement that's coming through. Lots of fun, some very different things that I've put together, me being the TO. Very, very different things I've put together that's going to throw a few curveballs at people. I'm especially looking forward to Panic. We might link that in the description later. But yeah, that one's looking forward as well. We also potentially have a club bits night or swap meet happening soonish.
Yeah, that's going to be something for next month. So there is a number of events that we've got in plan for the year. But in short, if you join the Rockingham Historical Gamers Facebook group, you'll be cued in with pretty much anything that's related to the hobby within our club and others as well. If you need to find out a bolt action event or information on any of that stuff, you got the Bolt Action Perth Facebook group, and you got the Rockingham Historical Gamers one as well. Either one or both of them, you're pretty much going to find everything that is happening in Perth, and a lot of the clubs are sort of interlinked and all sort of communicate freely with each other. So if you have any interest in the conflict, trying these kind of games, join either of those groups. Talk to some people there. Everybody is super friendly. There isn't a negative soul that I've found in this whole community. Everybody is super passionate about just wanting to play these games and teaching others how to play them. And if you are some kind of veteran of wargaming, you might see some stark differences with the player base of bolt action as against some of these ultra competitive games. I've just found that everybody really just wants to have a friendly, casual, fun game rather than trying to table you. Yeah.
It's interesting, the events that I've been putting together. So I've been the main bolt action TO for the last 3 years now. And I sort of started because some people were like, "Oh, it'd be really good to get an event together." And I was like, "Well, I can do that for you, but I don't know what sort of scale we're looking at." So the first event we had 10 people, and the year after that we had 20. Actually, it wasn't even the year after that; it was like 6 months after that. Then we started approaching 30, and we're sort of getting between 20 to 30 regular players. And the cool thing is they're not actually all the same players. We're getting new people all the time, which is really quite good. So there's a lot of, it's not that there's actually turnover, it's just that people aren't available at certain times, but we're still hitting those numbers. But they're all cruisy, they're all casual players. We don't have the horrible win-at-all-cost style play in Perth. We're very, very lucky. Even our other game systems don't really feature it that heavily. But bolt action lends itself to a sense of fair play and a sense of casual play that is, it's quite enjoyable. It's quite good.
That was actually one of the things that really grabbed me about bolt action specifically. I played a little bit of Flames of War, played some 40k, and I've tried a few other war games as well. But I think there's this really interesting thing that they've done with bolt action, and I know it probably sounds a little bit overdone at this point, but the way they do the turn order in bolt action, you have as much agency as you do in any other game, but at the same time you can't control the table as easily as you can in another game.
Yeah.
So for those that aren't familiar, a typical war game will usually run off an I go, you go scenario. So I move all of the forces that have on the field, and then I shoot all of them, and then I'll try to charge into close quarters, or I'll use some special abilities or something like that. There are some games where one player moves than the other one, then everybody shoots, then everybody shoots. But what bolt action does is it does it completely differently. You have a random way of activating units, and sometimes you might get to activate a couple of units in a row, and sometimes your opponent gets that opportunity. But generally speaking, most of the time it feels about 1-for-1, and I think it captures that sort of shift that happened in World War II, when you went from sort of static, quite large scale operations to those operations still occurring at the large scale, but at the tactical level you had a lot more initiative and a lot more maneuver, and a lot more, as the unfortunate reality is, a lot more lethality at that level. And so you had to think, and you had to move quite differently, and you had to rely on your lower echelons of leadership to be able to win the day. And I think that really carries through in bolt action without removing any player agency, without feeling like you can't control the game and having authority as a player. Because nobody likes that. Nobody likes a completely random system. But at the same time, you want there to be an element of chance, otherwise you're not playing a game.
Another aspect I find is why this game is so easily relatable, or to try and start and how to play is a number of things. One, it's very cheap. A lot of the war games out there, you need hundreds of infantry, a couple of vehicles, maybe some kind of flying vehicle, and these kind of things. And the price point for that, it's not something that you can collect and say, I've got a little bit of extra cash from my paycheck, and I can buy this whole army in one go and start building and collecting and probably playing the following week. One, with a lot of those games, building those models is going to take you months if you can afford it. The expense is really high. With bolt action, you're really buying a plastic infantry box, which can run anywhere from $30 to $60, a vehicle, and you're pretty much ready to go in a sense. So,
especially if you're running a veteran list, you can run a very lean, very effective mobile force for quite a low sort of monetary input.
Yeah, and we actually probably touch on that a bit later when we get into basic list types as well. Yeah. We'll cover that a little bit today and just talk about it. But yeah, it's a very easy game to get into. The upfront cost is not that high, but the maintenance cost is even smaller. There's most of the time these kits are quite good quality. They don't break easily as long as you put them together according to the instructions. For note, if you put them together without using the instructions and you do it wrong, they do break. I've had that happen. That's just what happens.
Yeah.
But,
and I'd also say painting. So in almost all of these miniatures games, bar X-Wing and a few other pre-painted ones, you are physically painting the figures if you want them to look pretty on the table. I would say that bolt action is probably the easiest one to paint. Military drab colors. There's not all these crazy highlights and special features and ornaments on the actual armor and these kind of things. You can really get away with spraying them basically a khaki color, coloring in the flesh with a flesh tone, and coloring your rifle a dark brown, and you're pretty much good to go. So for people who've never actually painted before, I'd probably say this is the easiest thing to paint. And
at this scale, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
It's very forgiving. There's also, so when you get into miniature painting, there's contrast paints now from Games Workshop, Citadel, that have come out, which have made painting a little bit more accessible as well. But you've also got things like washes, inks, and shades, and all those things. They can accentuate your painting by their application, but with bolt action, it's very easy to get to that point because you just put your flat colors on, put one of those washes on, and you're actually at a point of, you know what, for tabletop, they look pretty good. I'm happy with that.
And for the conflict as well,
yeah.
Everybody's got dirt, dark, khaki.
I mean, no one walked around in neon green.
Yeah. So it's once you, if you're brand new to miniature painting, like washes are really going to save you. If you don't want to get into it too much, you can really kind of blasely paint on a thick layer of wash to cover. Your novice mistakes with painting the actual figures in their base colors, and it's going to be quite suitable for the conflict and for the tables.
You'll definitely pass a 3-foot rule. If
you
hold the model out at the end of your own, if it looks like what you wanted it to, you're good to go.
And just another thing, like we've just talked about painting for about 5 minutes, but there are players who have never painted their force, and it's not frowned upon. It's not a requirement in most tournaments. There are exceptions to a particular campaign and these kind of things, but I don't think I've ran into anybody commenting, oh, why isn't this painted, blah blah blah. And there's also a sort of I would say there's an acceptance on allowing proxies for things that are very similar. There are probably 10 variations of Sherman M4, right? And Panzer 3s and Panzer 4s and all these kind of things. The tanks do look similar enough that we do allow it to kind of fit through your list based on what you need to do, if it pretty much looks like what it's going to be, with exception for a tournament and these kind of things.
Yeah, but even for a tournament, what it was ultimately going to come down to is how far on the historical accuracy are you willing to go? Because the further you go down that scale, ultimately the less playability your models become. Now, there's no right or wrong answer to any of that, but if you do, like for example, my Americans that I've got, American paratroopers, I've also got an early war American army, but obviously if I was way out on that edge of the historical accuracy, I wouldn't put those two sets of models together in an army. But if I'm just trying to get a pickup game with someone, or just trying to get a game in the first place, and I need 3 extra riflemen, those early war infantry are probably going to find their way in. They're not going to look great with the rest of the unit, and they're probably going to get a few looks from their comrades. But realistically, you shouldn't sacrifice playing a game and having fun right to the very extreme of those historical accuracies.
And I think there's an important distinction there, especially when it comes to tabletop wargaming. When looking at anything historical, bolt action and a vast majority of the other games that are out there, they are games first, and they just have a historical setting. Now, I obviously they don't mean that in sort of a disrespectful or to detract from the reality of the situation, but their primary intent is to be a game, to be fun to play, and to be ostensibly balanced, right? And so I think that's the thing that I like about bolt action, is that if you really wanted to go historical, that's absolutely there for you. And the points cost will carry you far enough that you can sort of go, okay, I've got a perfectly historically accurate platoon that, of American paratroopers that dropped in like Operation Neptune, like Operation Overlord, right? Down to the model count and the equipment, bar maybe whether or not they've got sidearms and rifle grenades. But you can take that with your point system and go, does anybody want to play me at this point cost? And then they can take, a mix of early, late war Germans and throw them together and you field against it. But that's the beauty of something like bolt action and a war game, is that if you wanted to simulate some historical stuff, you can pit some accurate platoons against each other. But the real power of it is what happens if you stick DAK, Deutsches Afrika Korps, in Stalingrad against some Japanese infantry? What do you get? And that's the beauty of a game like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing on the list building, focusing on something like a historic list that Gorcin's trying to do at the moment, it's not at a negative impact to a fair game. So I found that the majority of lists that come out there with whatever mindset that you have, either I want to go all historical, I want to go, you know, a vehicle heavy list, which is what I did the other week, or, you know, I want to kind of go with the balance force. They've all pretty much got the same chance against each other. And the other thing you'll find in other historical games, we mentioned Flames of War early on, that game is broken down into early, mid, and late, and late war armies only fight late war armies because the points and things that make the game balanced, it's really essentially 3 separate games.
Yes.
Bolt action doesn't matter. A rifleman from early war is the same as late war in the sense of the stats and these kind of things, and early lists can fight late lists, and you still got just as much as a chance effectively to win.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've done it in the past. I've taken an early war Soviet NKVD border patrol force. So before, just at the end of Stalin purges, but before they became the secret police, as they were. Very minimal armor, very minimal any equipment, because they were just a border patrol force. Went to an event, fought some late war armies, beat them. The whole thing was inexperienced, and people were just like, I can't believe inexperienced troops that aren't just spam hoarding guns. And it's like, well, at the end of the day, it's partly dice, but you shouldn't have discounted that they were an effective force.
Another thing to give context, an event or two ago that you were hosting, we had that one player with the Polish Lancers.
Yes.
So, you know, Polish cavalry with physical lancers are effective at destroying tanks and infantry and all these kind of things.
Pretty much everything.
So, like, you know, what you would perceive based on, you know, this is almost technology that is outdated in the Great War. And because cavalry is just not effective in that conflict for the later years and all this kind of stuff. That doesn't matter. The game is still balanced enough that both of those players could win.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And have fun doing it.
And have fun doing it. I can assure you that Tom had fun doing it.
But, you know, there are other examples of this, like, you know, Soviet partisans, they should be an ineffective fighting force aside from, you know, guerrilla tactics and these kind of things. They shouldn't be able to go head to head with, you know, a professional army, but they can in this game.
Yes, and that's where you know, as Gorcin was saying, like it's game first and historical second. So I often explain bolt action as a historically inspired game system. It's because it does allow, it's got to fudge things a little bit from history in order to make the game itself playable. But look, it's really enjoyable, and it's quite good. So we might just pop into what we're doing in terms of a hobby update very quickly, because we've been chatting quite a bit already. We're sort of moving around our list a little bit.
That's right.
So hobby update for myself. With the newborn, I've had a lot of time off work for carer's leave, which has been really good. Spending time with our family and doing things that I should be doing to help support my newborn. Little Melody
Such
Rose.
as painting miniatures.
Such as painting miniatures. Sorry, were you confused? So what have I painted recently? I finished up a unit of Pink Horrors for 40k. I started and completed a unit of Screamers for 40k. I finished up the Katyusha from start to finish, the Katyusha multiple rocket launcher. Man, I love that thing. It's so brutal.
So what make did you use for that? Is that
so
a
that's
Rubicon?
the Rubicon one. Yeah, so it's slightly larger than the Warlord Games one in terms of its scale, but it's minimal. It's like a couple of centimeters on either, like across the whole thing. It's not massive. So I've done all those. I've been 3D printing out the wazoo. I've been painting up some Saga miniatures for Dark Age, about halfway through those. And I'm just finishing off as well, alternating between those Saga Warriors, a Zinch Herald on disc for 40k.
Oh, lovely. It's a good model, that one.
Yeah. So it's all right. The paint job that's gone on him is okay.
So have you got like an old demon force that you're working on? Or?
So there is an old demon force that is there at the moment. It's It's being
We're
worked on.
not talking about bolt action anymore.
No. So this is the multi setup for. Technically, the models can be used for all sorts of different games where the models aren't specific. Like Kings of War obviously has Mantic's range, but you can use whatever models you want. It's down to the base sizes. Age of Sigmar and 40k, because they're all circle bases now, the crossover is a lot easier than what it used to be. The army is not competitive in any way, shape or form. It's like the fluffiest thing out there. But I wanted to paint something different, which was the inspiration for the army, and bright pink and bright blue with a couple of other colours thrown in across the majority of the force. That's sort of very different to the drab greys, blues that I would normally paint. So so that's been quite good. And I'm just, once the hero's done, that's the first battalion box done, and then I've got another battalion box to Lord of Change, and another, I think it's another of each of the core choices that's in there. But, so a lot's been going on, and obviously taking care of my newborn.
How about yourself, Jacob?
It just doesn't stop. There's just too many systems I get involved with. It's a big problem with me. But we've got a Wings of Glory event that we're going to be setting up in probably a month or two, that we've got to have a think about, what kind of mats that we want and those kind of things, and how we want to structure the event. So we will be working on that fairly soon. For painting, just finished a couple more DAC vehicles a week or so ago. I'm working on a commission for 40k at the moment, and that's kind of an all Khorne-ish looking chaos force. So that they're all in the bright red armor and gold on the trims and those kind of things. Did a Norman force for Vikings a couple weeks ago as well. Have two Fallschirmjäger armies in the list to build. I've been given an Italian army to paint as well.
So Jacob wasn't kidding.
Then I've got to do all the Cruel Seas and the Black Sea stuff, so I've got the starter sets for each of those. I'm sure I'm missing out on a couple other things. We did that.
Probably your hobby, mate.
Vietnam figures.
Yeah.
I picked up orcs for 40k. Oh my gosh, man! There's probably like 100 figures in there. I mean, they're fun because it's again, like, I've been painting these drab military colors for years now. That the Warhammer that I thought was boring when I started 40k, and just as I was moving on to bold action, I was like, oh god, these bright colors, it looks silly. And I moved to doing bolt action, a lot of historical stuff, and now it's an interesting thing to paint outside of what I'm normally doing. But yeah, there are boxes and boxes of things unopened, which is unfortunate. But that's all part of the fun of it, to be honest. I actually do quite enjoy painting. It's a good way to relax and let go and not focus on other things. But I'm always painting something that we're going to use.
Yes.
So it may go to a particular game system or event that we have down the line and these kind of things. But other than that, I do want to have a look into building some terrain this year as well, because I've kind of let that go for a few years. So we have this great guy called Nick in our club, and he builds a lot of the terrain and a lot of the boards and these kind of things. And I just don't feel right talking to him about my next sort of plan, where I kind of want to do a no man's land with a little bit of trenches on each side, and have a look at some World War I wargaming.
Nice.
And I haven't quite sold him on the idea, and I haven't really discussed it with the club either on what game system I want to use and these kind of things. So I might just kind of design that on my own and then present that later. However, John has collected a full Ottoman force, and he has some desert terrain, and that would go well with the desert boards that we've already got and these kind of things. But yeah, I was kind of looking at like French armies, because early war they've got all these crazy colors, which is kind of interesting. And
very unfortunate for them.
Yeah.
In terms of like military history, they actually also had some very interesting like small arms rifle design. Like the Lebel rifles of that period were actually really interesting and sort of a little bit ahead of the curve. So you're actually sort of touched on something quite interesting there, especially the French in World War I. They sort of are very unfortunately and unfairly sort of get written off in history, but they actually did some very interesting stuff at that level.
Other than that, like we're going to have pretty much a really full calendar for this year with events. I can't specifically go into all of them because we still need to work a lot of them out, but it's going to be...
At this point in the cast, we actually lose connectivity to all our cameras. We ended up just continuing on because we were enjoying what we were creating. In total, we record just under 2.5 hours of content, and we're going to break those up into 3 parts. Forgive us, we're pretty new at this, but we'll make sure that we improve for the next one.
Busy year. It was a busy year last year. We got quite a bit of traction from Southern Hemisphere Open, which is probably Perth's biggest hobby event. Usually it's a couple of days at a large venue, and people are playing all kinds of tournaments for pretty much every game system and every club in Perth. So I'm really excited to do that again. And prepare a couple of systems and get demoing and teach people about the club and the games that we played. But again, last year when we did that, it was a lot focused on bolt action, teaching people about bolt action, how to play it, and it was really exciting because we were placed right next to tactics when you were running that event. And we'd talk to them about bolt action, give them a couple hours of a demo and these kind of things, and just see them walk into tactics, buy an infantry box and go. I mean, we may not have ran into that person to join the club because they might not be locally close to Rockingham, but hopefully they're playing bolt action at Outpost or something else, and that was really cool.
It's been very good.
It was actually how I found out about
really?
Rockingham Historical Games. Yeah,
there we go.
You guys weren't. I think I was there on the Monday because it was over like a public holiday weekend.
The third day, that's when I was wiped out.
I was there sort of 8 a.m. sharp for, I think it was a 40k doubles event with a friend, and then there was I remember there was like a little sort of podium in the center of like SHO, and that had all of the different historical wargamers, and I remember I just like picked up business cards and I was looking at all the displays and stuff, and I was like, one of these guys has got to be cool, and then I was like, I'm late for muster, I gotta go. So it was actually funny because I didn't meet anybody from the club, but and I think a lot of people write that off, just having that physical presence was got at least me in.
And it was just really easy with that big D-Day board that Nick brought, that he had made, that we had that all stretched out. I can't remember how many feet it is. But
it was
it's
4
tiles.
feet wide, and they were 2 foot wide tiles, but there were 4 of them, so it was 8 foot long. It's huge.
But we broke that up into the individual games. So we had one section people playing kind of like a tank war for bolt action. We had another section in the middle that was chain of command, and then we kind of had the beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and the easy one was 148 tactic, which I'd learned about maybe a week prior to that event. It's kind of like a one-pager, 4 infantry aside, and it was really cool because I could teach people how to play the game within a couple of minutes. We had young kids, we had vets come from Vietnam and all these kind of things. So there was a railway expo next door. So they came in and they're like, oh, this is interesting. You know, my parents were here and that and blah blah blah. This looks like kind of like French Village. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what we kind of tried to do. But it was amazing because we just had lots of people who maybe either inexperienced, didn't have the capacity in the sense of these war games. They got large rule books and these kind of things so they started off with 148 and they said, this is interesting. I'm like, you know what else is good that is the same kind of figures? Have a talk with Patrick or Sean and have a look at bolt action or chain of command and these kind of things. So that was really cool. But I want to have a look at other ways we can integrate it for this year. So an obvious choice would be Wings of Glory. And obviously Cruel Seas as well. And try and integrate the whole conflict in a number of different games. Try and make it really simple for people to jump in and out of to learn about that kind of stuff.
So that's sort of the main thing that I'm trying to achieve with my hobby this year. I got I don't have anywhere nearly big piles of shame as you guys, which is fortunate.
That's good.
I've got probably about my 1250 American Force about half painted to a standard I'm pretty happy with so far. I've got I got an easy to build Primaris kit, which is basically 3 Space Marines from 40k, just because the models are really cool, but I thought, it's actually, the last couple of years I really put a lot of effort into painting individual miniatures as opposed to just getting them painted, getting them on a board. And I thought, look, it's been a while since I've painted something from 40k, a really nice model with inspiration, and really just taken the time and try some new techniques and really get some skills going. So I've really sort of knuckled down on that, and as you said, painting is a really nice sort of relaxing thing, and I find that it's a really good, comfortable space to go, okay, let's go on Instagram, let's find somebody who's got a cool technique, let's just try it, pick up a model, and let's give it a go. So that's sort of where I've been in the hobby space recently. I've been really slowing down. I really took my time with a Sherman kit that actually Nick gave to us, and I wanted some decals in the tank, but I didn't actually want to use decals. So I did a lot of hand painting. I did some divisional and unit sort of markings. That was really fun. It was a good challenge. But I think sort of from the club point of view, the thing that sets a club from having a couple of friends to play with is those big event days. And so the Wings of Glory thing that we got, I really love that system, because in about 5 minutes you can get people who've never even played a board game, you can get them into Wings, and you get them to be pretty competent flying aces. So I thought, look, why don't we just get a whole bunch of people, we'll supply all the models and all the rule kits and stuff, we'll have a demo game, and then we'll just run a score sheet, get everybody to fly everybody, and see who comes out with flying ace at the end of it. So that's what we're going to try to achieve with that event. And going to be printing out a couple of more sort of game mats for that one. I think Jacob, you and I were sort of working on getting a tutorial for that going. Just because we had sort of a Battle of Britain one laid out in the video that we did, and we actually got a lot of good feedback for that one. And for the cost and the time, it was about a couple hours in Photoshop, cost about $50 to get it printed, and of course, it's not the same quality as somebody who's a professional artist coming up with a game mat, getting it printed on neoprene and so on and so forth. But honestly, it was actually pretty good.
I'm really impressed with the quality and the fact that we can just change the design, I guess, and make it whatever we want. That's something I'm going to go through with Gorcin at one point. We'll put together a video on how we created that Wings of Glory map. We'll have to find another conflict that we'll want to. I think it would be a bit more impressive if we create something different than just a London map. We could use for the event that we're going to put on.
And then the other thing, sort of talking about getting multiple game systems together, one of the events that I'm sort of designing and slowly starting to build some boards and some terrain for is I want to do an event inspired by Operation Varsity. It was sort of late World War II. It was effectively an airborne assault over the Rhine River in West Germany. But it had a lot of the same things about Operation Overlord. You had an artillery bombardment beforehand. You had sort of troops that this time they had a better idea that it was coming. You had an airborne assault. You had a battle for air superiority before that. You had tanks trying to make amphibious crossings. But it was sort of like Operation Overlord, admittedly a smaller scale, but it was by troops that had sort of already all done it before. And they realized that their timetable was much more compressed. You couldn't do a naval bombardment the night before, at sunset, and then have your airborne assault overnight, and then have your armor rock up, and your main bulk of your infantry rock up later. Because there was a few points during that Operation Overlord where it was actually quite linchpin
on the guns.
There was there was a few moments where it was right on the line. Now the Allies had weight in numbers and so on and so forth, so not to say that it was a foregone conclusion, but there was a few points where it could have gone a lot worse for them. And so Operation Varsity, what I'm hoping to do is we're going to have a Wings of Glory game beforehand, and that's going to be able to dictate sort of air superiority and sort of troop movements beforehand. We're going to do a firefight game, which is going to be some Pathfinders and some sort of scouting and probing missions, and then we're going to have a big sort of bolt action day. There's going to be some special rules in play based on all of the outcomes of the other games, and it's not going to be nobody likes a game decided before they get to the table, so they're going to be sort of hindrances and advantages and disadvantages, but hopefully it's not going to be one-sided in terms beforehand. So a lot of my hobby time has gone into what makes a mission fun as opposed to sort of accurate, and how do you have consequences without removing agency, and somewhere in between all of that, I'm going to build, I think it's a 12x4 board. So and and I'm going to do that all in 2 months, right? Because that's how this goes.
Pretty much.
That's how hobbyists do everything. You're like, oh no, better get going.
I have an interesting video to share for you. Mini Maniac, I think he just put up a how to build board, and I think I listed it on the group the other day. But yeah, it's super simple. Those foam things that you're buying from buyers, and just chipping away at them with knives and these kind of things, and then gravel paint and browns and inks and that kind of stuff.
So I've done some smaller scale stuff. I've done some dioramas. I've made some props out of foam before. Cool. So hopefully none of the individual techniques are going to be too much out of comfort zone.
How much you're doing,
and then also putting it together, because I might have built a building, or I've done like a little trench system, or I've done a little hill, to put a piece of armor on, for example. But that's different to making a board that's fun to play.
Definitely.
So I'm going to be relying a lot on Nick and his advice.
And as I got heaps of materials in my hobby of shame.
Thanks for checking in with us. That's the end of the first part of the first episode of the Historical Miniature Gamers podcast. Be sure to check where we left off in parts 2 and 3.